I thought our marriage was perfect. Then I found this on Google Earth. Secrets buried under the snow. A kiss that turned my world upside down. Should I do next? I never expected my life to unravel the way it did. But sometimes, fate has a twisted sense of humor. My name is Don Summers, and I always thought I had everything under control. At 35 years old, I was managing my father's landscaping business, a company built from the ground up through blood, sweat, and the relentless ambition of a man who taught me everything I knew. I had a beautiful wife, Brittany, whom I'd been with since college, and 2 kids, Daniel, who was 9, and Brian, 6. On paper, everything looked perfect. But behind the veneer of suburban success, something darker was lurking. I was sitting at my laptop, working through some business logistics, when the unexpected happened. My mom had recently joined me in the office to help with paperwork, an effort that ended in disaster when she accidentally deleted critical files. I wasn't worried, though. I had backups. While waiting for the restoration process, I decided to kill time using Google Earth, a tool I'd often used for planning future jobs. It's not the most thrilling way to pass the time, but I had gotten used to it. That's when I saw it. I zoomed in on my own home where I lived with my family. The white siding, the freshly laid stone pathway. I'd seen it all before. But this time, something was different. Something was wrong. A red car was parked in my driveway. Now, I know every car that comes and goes from my street. It's a small town, and I have a pretty good memory for details. But this car, this wasn't one I recognized. It was a recent photo taken last winter. The snow was still on the ground, and I could see the new garage extension I just completed in the background. This car, bright red and sleek, was parked in my driveway, and it didn't belong there. I squinted at the image, trying to make out the model. The angle was unclear, but I could tell it was a late model sedan. I didn't remember anyone visiting, at least not anyone who would drive something like that. The thought nagged at me, but I pushed it aside. Maybe it was a mistake. I switched to Google Street View, hoping to find more answers. The image shifted, now showing springtime. The red car was gone, but what I saw next made my blood run cold. There, in the doorway of my home, stood my wife Brittany, hugging and kissing a man. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The man was obscured by the angle of the camera, but there was no mistaking the way they were holding each other. A kiss, a long embrace. It was clear this was no innocent greeting. My mind raced. Who was this man? And why hadn't she told me about him? As my anger swelled, I forced myself to calm down. I printed out the image, my hands shaking. I needed to know who this man was. I studied the photo carefully, trying to make sense of it. The way the man stood, the shape of his face. It was familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. Then, like a slap to the face, the memory hit me. Ben Clausen, Brittany's ex-boyfriend from college. The man she always talked about fondly, though never with the same affection she had for me. Ben was everything I wasn't, a former NFL player turned successful real estate agent. He had moved back to our hometown a few years ago, and, to my knowledge, he was married with a kid. But what was he doing at my house? And why was Brittany acting like this? I thought about confronting her right away, but something held me back. I needed to know more. I needed solid proof before I acted. I did what anyone in my situation might do. I Googled Ben Clausen. What I found only deepened the pit of confusion in my stomach. Ben was not only successful but wealthy, the type of man who could easily lure my wife into something that could ruin our family. His wife, Angela, was a beautiful woman, but she seemed to have a history of overlooking Ben's indiscretions. The thought twisted the knife even deeper, but I needed answers. I picked up the phone and called Ben's office, pretending to be a potential client. A cheerful receptionist answered. informing me that Ben was out showing properties but would be back in about an hour. I hung up, my frustration mounting. I wasn't going to get answers this way, but the image of Ben and Brittany haunted me. I needed to find out if there was more to this than a kiss. Was it a one-time lapse in judgment, or was it the beginning of something darker? My thoughts raced as I stood in the dim glow of the office. The quiet hum of the computer was the only sound breaking the silence, but my mind was anything but still. I had to know if this was some horrible mistake, some weird glitch in the universe. Maybe I was overreacting, maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that something was off. The moment I saw that photo of Brittany with Ben, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a coincidence. There was more to this than met the eye, and I wasn't about to let it slide. As I waited for Ben to return to his office, I considered my options. I could confront Brittany directly, but the last thing I wanted was to be caught in a heated argument without understanding the full picture. No, I needed to gather more evidence. I grabbed my truck keys and headed for the door, my mind still spinning. As I walked toward the driveway, the sight of my son's toy car in the back seat of my truck stopped me in my tracks. It was a simple, childish reminder of everything that was at stake here. I didn't want to drag my children into this nightmare, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't just sit back and let this go. I drove to Ben's office with a tight knot in my stomach. The city streets felt unusually quiet, and the hum of the truck's engine was the only sound that kept me company. Ben's real estate office was located in a sleek, modern building downtown, and when I arrived, I spotted one of my workers just outside, chatting with a colleague. I didn't stop to talk. My focus was solely on confronting Ben, getting to the bottom of this mess. I walked through the lobby of the building, trying to appear calm, though my fists were clenched at my sides. The curious glances of office workers in suits followed me as I passed, and I didn't care. This wasn't about appearances anymore. This was about the truth. I reached the 5th floor and entered the Clausen real estate office, where I was immediately greeted by Mrs. Angela Clausen. Her professional demeanor was striking, but it didn't do anything to settle the unease growing inside me. "Hello, I'm Don Summers," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She gave me a polite handshake. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Summers. How can I help you?" "I have a photograph I'd like you to see," I said, slipping the printed photo from my jacket pocket. Her expression shifted slightly as she took it from me, her eyes scanning the image. The room seemed to shrink as I waited for her reaction. I watched her carefully, my heart hammering in my chest. Her calm facade began to crack as she studied the photo of her husband and my wife in an intimate embrace. After a long, tense silence, she finally spoke. "That's him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt the weight of her words settle on my shoulders like a crushing boulder. The man in the photo was indeed Ben, and this wasn't a mistake. This was happening. I tried to keep my composure. "When was this taken?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No more than 3 months ago," she replied, her voice betraying a mix of anger and sadness. "I'm sorry, Don, but you need to confront your wife. This is beyond anything I could have imagined." I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. I had come here for answers, but what I was hearing only deepened the pit of despair in my stomach. Ben and Brittany had been seeing each other. This wasn't just a kiss, it was a full-fledged affair. I needed to act, but first I had to make sure. I called Brittany only to be met with silence. No answer. I then called the gym where she worked as a personal trainer. Mandy, her coworker and friend, picked up, but her voice sounded hesitant. "She left about 10 minutes ago," Mandy said. "She said she was meeting you for lunch at Logan's." I quickly pulled up the Find My Phone app and checked Brittany's location. It showed that she was at home. My heart skipped a beat. She was lying. She was home and she wasn't alone. Angela, who had been watching me closely, took a deep breath and stood up, her anger clearly visible. "We need to go. Now." I followed Angela to the elevator, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The silence between us was deafening, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know how to feel. Betrayal, anger, confusion. They all swirled inside me, fighting for dominance. "You should have confronted her a long time ago," Angela said quietly as the elevator doors slid shut. "I couldn't. I didn't know what I was dealing with," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought she would do this to me. I loved her." Angela didn't respond, and we rode in silence, each of us consumed by our own thoughts. When the elevator finally reached the ground floor, we walked toward the parking lot, Angela leading the way. As we got into her car, her phone rang. "Ben's back at the office," she said, speaking into the phone. "I'll be there in a few minutes." I felt the anger building again, but I held it back. The truth was, I had no idea what I was walking into. This wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal that reached deeper than I could have ever imagined. But I wasn't going to back down. I needed answers, and I was going to get them no matter the cost. The drive back to my house felt like it took an eternity. I was still numb from the conversation with Angela, but there was no denying the cold, hard truth anymore. As we pulled into my driveway, I saw the red car again. It was sitting there, as if mocking me, parked like it had every right to be. My heart began to pound in my chest. This was it. The moment I dreaded, the moment I had tried to avoid, had finally arrived. Angela didn't speak as we parked across the street. She just stared ahead, clearly wrestling with her own emotions. I followed her lead as we walked toward the front door. I glanced around the house, at the familiar surroundings that once made me feel safe. Everything felt different now, like a stranger had taken over my life. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. No sounds of kids playing, no Brittany singing along to her favorite songs in the kitchen. The silence hit me hard. As I moved toward the living room, I could hear muffled voices, whispers, low and soft, coming from behind the door. Without thinking, I pushed the door open. What I saw froze me in place. Brittany was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around another woman. They were close, their faces inches apart, and I couldn't deny what I was seeing. It wasn't just a kiss, like I'd feared. It was a full embrace. The other woman, who I didn't recognize, was smiling as if she belonged there. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the man standing next to them, Ben. He wasn't just a spectator. He was filming the entire scene on a tablet. Couldn't breathe. My body felt like it was on fire, my rage boiling to the surface as I took in the full scope of the betrayal. I should have turned away. I should have left before things got out of hand. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the sight of my wife, the woman I had given everything to, the woman who had promised me forever, in the arms of another person. And not just one. There were 3 of them in this twisted scene, playing their roles like it was all just a game. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but it was impossible. I had to say something. I had to confront them. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the silence. Like a knife, the other woman gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Ben immediately dropped the tablet, his face going pale as he realized who had just entered the room. Brittany, looking like a deer caught in headlights, pulled away from the woman, her face flushed with guilt and confusion. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "Why would you do this to me? to us? Brittany didn't answer at first. She just stared at me, her face a mixture of regret and fear. Her eyes darted between me and the other woman, as if searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. Is this the life you wanted? I continued, my anger spilling over. To betray me with not just one person, but two? You think I wouldn't find out? You think you could get away with this? The other woman, who I now recognized as Jamie Keir, looked down at the floor, her face red with shame. I could see the fear in her eyes, and for a split second, I almost felt bad for her. But then I remembered why I was here. This wasn't about her. This was about Brittany. You don't have to do this, Brittany whispered, her voice barely audible. Please. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but it didn't soften the blow. How long has this been going on? I demanded. Only twice, Jamie stammered, her voice breaking. I swear, it was only twice. I felt a surge of disgust. You think that makes it okay? Twice? Once is enough, Jamie. Once is enough to destroy everything. Ben, who had been silent up until now, tried to speak, but I cut him off. Don't even try to justify it, I snapped. You're no better than she is. You both made a choice. You betrayed me. Angela, who had followed me into the room, stood silently in the doorway, her camera in hand. I hadn't even noticed she had started recording, but now it made sense. She knew the gravity of the situation, and she wasn't going to let me be the only one to suffer from the fallout. Get out, I said, my voice cold and sharp. All of you, get out of my house. Now. Jamie, trembling, hurried to gather her things, her eyes still wide with shock. Ben hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether or not to say something. But I didn't care. The damage was done. He didn't say a word before grabbing his tablet and following Jamie out the door. Brittany stayed behind, her face crumpled in guilt. She tried to speak again, but I didn't want to hear it. Dawn, please, she begged, her voice cracking. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. But the words didn't matter anymore. The trust was shattered. The relationship we had, the one I had built my entire life around, was gone. There was no coming back from this. I don't want to hear it, I said flatly. You've done enough damage. I turned away and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, helpless. But I couldn't bring myself to go any further. Instead, I collapsed into the nearest chair, my head in my hands. What was I supposed to do now? What was the next step? I could feel the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. Not after everything she had done. Angela followed me in, sitting quietly next to me. You have to be strong, Dawn, she said softly. You're going to get through this. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I didn't expect her to return. Not after everything. But that night, after the house had fallen into an eerie silence, there she was, standing at the front door like nothing had happened. Brittany, my wife, the woman I had trusted, the woman who had shattered everything between us. I had just gotten off the phone with my lawyer, who assured me that the path ahead was clear. Divorce, custody, everything was going to happen quickly, but there was one last thing that needed to be done before the paperwork. One last thing that had to be said, one last confrontation. She knocked softly, as if asking for permission to break down the walls I'd spent so many years building around myself. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood by the window, watching her through the blinds like a man waiting for a storm to pass. But it wasn't a storm. It was Brittany, standing there, waiting for her life to crumble. Waiting for me to make the first move, even though she knew there was nothing left to salvage. With a long, heavy sigh, I finally opened the door. She looked at me with wide eyes, a mixture of regret and fear clouding her face. She had come to apologize, but I wasn't interested in her apologies anymore. What we had, that perfect life we'd built together, was long gone. "You can't fix this," I said, my voice cold and detached. "I know," she replied, her voice shaking, "but I need to talk to you. Please." I didn't let her in. Not yet. Instead, I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe, the weight of the past few days pressing down on me. "What's there to say, Brittany? You've already said it all. I've seen it all. It's done." Her lip trembled as she tried to find the right words. I made a mistake, a huge one, but I never meant for it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you, Dawn." "Then why did you?" I shot back. "Why go behind my back with him? And why with her? You couldn't have waited until I left for work? Or was it something you had to do when I wasn't watching?" She flinched at my words, but it didn't stop her from stepping closer. "I was lonely. I felt neglected, like you weren't there for me anymore. And then Ben, he came back into my life. He was familiar, comfortable. I thought it would make me feel better. I felt my blood boil at the mention of Ben. Familiar? Comfortable? So you chose to destroy everything we built because it was easier? You couldn't talk to me? You couldn't tell me you were feeling neglected instead of sneaking around behind my back?" I saw the guilt in her eyes, and for a moment, it almost looked like she was about to break down. But I didn't let myself feel sorry for her. "Not anymore. You think I'm a fool?" I continued. "You thought you could just keep this from me forever? You thought I wouldn't notice? You think you can just apologize and make it all go away?" She looked like she was going to speak, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. "No, no more excuses, Brittany. I've given you enough chances. I've been patient. I've been forgiving, but you've crossed the line. There's no going back now. You wanted this, so you can have it." Her face crumpled, and she choked back a sob, but I wasn't moved. "Not anymore. Please, Dawn, don't leave me. Don't leave us," she whispered, her voice full of desperation. "I'm not the one who left, Brittany. You did that the moment you chose Ben and Jamie and whoever else you were with behind my back. You left the minute you decided you didn't want me anymore. You betrayed me." She stumbled back, as if my words physically hurt her, but I couldn't bring myself to care. She had destroyed everything I'd worked so hard for. She had ruined our family. Before I could say anything else, she broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant to hurt you," she said through her sobs. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just trying to find happiness again. I was trying to find something I lost. I'm not the one who lost anything." I shot back, the anger in my voice rising again. "You did. You lost your integrity. You lost my trust. And you lost your family. You think you can just beg me to forgive you and everything will be fine? It doesn't work like that." Her sobs grew louder, and I could feel the tension in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't going to break. "Not this time. You'll never understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, Brittany, you'll never understand what you've done. You've lost everything, and I don't think I can ever forgive you." I turned my back and walked away, leaving her standing there, broken. The door closed behind me with a finality I hadn't anticipated, and I could feel the weight of it settle in. It was over. There was no coming back from this. The house felt colder now, emptier, as I stood there alone. The door to the room closed behind me with a finality that echoed through my mind, reverberating with the weight of what had just happened. I had just walked away from my wife, the woman I had loved for over a decade, the woman who had torn everything apart, the woman who, in a matter of weeks, had completely shattered my trust. I could still hear her sobs in my mind, but the anger and hurt were louder. The sound of her heart breaking didn't matter to me anymore. She'd made her choice. I had made mine. This was it. Yet, as I stood in the silent house, the weight of the finality settled in. What now? I had been so focused on the anger, on getting even, on making sure I was in control of the situation, that I didn't stop to think about what came next. What was my life going to look like after this? The thought made me uneasy. I didn't know how long I stood there, my mind replaying the events of the past few days over and over. Finally, I walked to the study and sank into the chair, staring at the computer screen. I couldn't help myself. I pulled up the video of Brittany and Ben and watched it again. This time, I wasn't looking for answers. I didn't need to see it to understand what had happened. I just couldn't stop watching. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my trance. It was a text from Angela, the one person who had witnessed it all unfold. She had been there in the background watching me fall apart. "You okay?" the message read. I stared at the words for a moment, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Angela had been a support throughout this. She'd been by my side when I confronted Ben, and even when I had to face Brittany. But what now? What did I really want from her? I put my phone down and ran my hands through my hair. The pain of betrayal was still there, a constant ache that I didn't know how to relieve. But something about Angela's message made me stop and reconsider. Maybe I wasn't alone in this after all. I glanced at the clock. It was late. The kids were already in bed, and it was quiet in the house. Too quiet. I stood up, made my way to the back door, and stepped out onto the porch. I needed to clear my head. As I stood there, breathing in the cool night air, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around to see Angela walking toward me, her face a mixture of concern and determination. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, waiting for me to speak. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," I admitted, the words escaping me before I could stop them. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I want to." Angela nodded. "You don't have to fix anything, Dawn. You've done enough." I looked at her, my mind racing. I just can't believe she did this to me. I don't know how to feel anymore." Angela stepped closer, her hand brushing against mine. "You don't have to feel anything right now. Just breathe. You'll figure it out." For a moment, I stood there, feeling a quiet relief wash over me. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. Angela had been right all along. There was no fixing this. There was no going back. But that didn't mean I had to carry the weight of it forever. And then, something unexpected happened. Angela leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It wasn't the kind of kiss you see in movies. It was soft, tentative, and full of understanding. It was the kind of kiss that told me everything would be okay, even if I didn't believe it just yet. She pulled away, looking me in the eyes. "You're not alone, Dawn," she said quietly. "You never have been." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that life could still go on. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe there was something better waiting for me, something I hadn't seen before. But for now, I would take things one day at a time. I would focus on the kids, on the business, on rebuilding what was broken. I didn't know where this new path would take me, but I was ready to walk it.